very premise which we stand for is scaling innovation. And this topic is very appropriate. Research lab to markets, something which personally drives me. And right from my engineering days, I had this nagging question: research in the lab, no output in the market. We don't see the benefits of research. We don't see, as a customer, as a society, why. And that has been my personal journey. So before we get into the panel discussion, I'll take few minutes to share my experience and my journey, which I hope you find it interesting. And then we'll move on to having each of the panelists come and share their experience. Our objective is to keep it short. We know we're just pre-lunch, so we don't want to, go on and on. And at the same time, we'll make it interactive and interesting. So I would request all of you to please be part of this. Share your thoughts, comments, questions. We will invite them at the end. And after each panelist, we will summarize the thoughts of the panelist. And at the end of the whole discussion, we want to really go with takeaways. That's what we all decided. So we were sitting, chatting up in terms of what we really should be doing. Because we can come and talk and finish a conference, but it's important that we can take it up from, this level. And we've got illustrious, co-panelists. So the whole point is, can we take it back and put it to use? Can we really recommend policy changes and trigger, action? That's the whole idea of this session. So before I get into that, I'll just quickly introduce my panelists. So I have on my left Radha Rangarajan. She's the CEO of Vitas Pharma. It's a 4-year-old company incubated at University of Hyderabad. And next to Radha is sitting Dr. Satya Narayana, who's the chief scientist and, interestingly, the business development head at IICT, which stands for Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, which is one of the most illustrious CSR lab that I've personally come across. And his title says it all. And then I have Dr. Padmanabhan, who is from Advanced Research Center International, which is also based out of Hyderabad. So we have a good mix of government and academia and private representation here. So as I was sharing with you, the whole premise with which I got into this whole field was, what can we do to trigger change? How can we work with researchers, with research institutes, with scientists, with academia to bring about a change? Like what and obviously, when you look up to this, you talk about US, because that's the most successful model in terms of how industry academia partnerships happen and they flourish, and how it's so commonplace to have a lot of academic startups. So I started back in 2005. Now we are in 2015. So there's been a huge change, and there's been a great journey for me personally in terms of how things are evolving, how we are talking about these things, and how we are taking action, because we never had business development in a research lab, 10 years back. So that is obviously, something which is really positive. So few things I wanted to share with you. In terms of when we talk about research in the research labs to market, there are typically two ways it can happen. One is an entrepreneurial route, where you can have a startup where a professor or a researcher can on his own set up a company, or you can always partner with outsiders. You could have entrepreneurs, smart ones sitting in the audience, who could spot opportunity and say, hey professor, can we work together? Can we start a company around this? So this is still unusual in India. It's not so much the norm, but it is starting to happen. IITs is a classic example where there are a lot of academic startups, and you will always see that in the team, there'll be one faculty who is involved in some capacity. He could be a co-founder, he could be the CTO, could be just an advisor, but they would definitely have somebody who comes from that background. So which is really one of the best routes to take research, take technology into the markets. The other routes, which is more difficult and challenging, is what we in the industry call technology transfer. How do I transfer a technology which exists in IICT, for example, to, let's say, Radha's company, right? So there is technology, there is know-how, there is research, there is some output, learnings. How can all that be transferred to a private enterprise? That is what we call technology transfer or technology licensing, which is where you typically license out what you have from government to private sector. And the reason you need to do that is because obviously government's mandate is not to commercialize and to run businesses. Their mandate is to do research, to come out with output, to try to solve problems. But the person who will carry it to the markets and implement it would typically be an entrepreneur like Radha, who would take up, what comes out of it. So that, is the other route by which it happens. And there are lots of challenges in terms of taking it from a research institute to a private entrepreneur. And I think in India, and all the panelists, when we were discussing, we agreed, the biggest problem is lack of trust, right? So if I'm a research institute, and if a private entrepreneur walks in, I'm skeptical. Is he trying to cheat me? Or, is he going to give me a fair deal? Things like that. And from an entrepreneur's perspective, will the institute deliver? They can talk and talk, and they can give me papers, but will it translate into something tangible for me? And there is a huge gap, right, when you do research in the lab. So R is one part of the whole R&D cycle. The other part is far more challenging, time-consuming, capital-intensive development. So who's going to do that whole development, right? So it seems fine working as a prototype, but when I have to actually launch a product, there are so many challenges, and there's a lot of slip between the cup and the lip. So is it really going to happen? So that's the key, right? So that's where there are a lot of challenges. And I personally, when I was, I had taken a sabbatical from Skynovation, and I worked with an incubator called Willgrow based out of Chennai, which actually partners with IIT Madras, and whose job is to work with a lot of innovators who could be from the audience, could be a serial innovator, could be a student, could be a grassroots innovator, a farmer, to take those ideas and try to see if entrepreneurs can pick it up so that those ideas don't die. Because there are a lot of good ideas out there, but who's going to implement, execute, and commercialize it? So my job was to actually enable that process, and that's when I realized there are huge challenges. And I think the biggest challenge is, as I said, one is lack of trust, and other is lack of understanding each other. You really don't know what the other person wants, and what you should be expecting from the person. And typically an innovator is not business minded, so they don't really understand industry terms, business language, right? So what does licensing mean, what is royalty, stuff like that. And then you have extreme cases. We came across a very interesting technology which was in water, right? So water purification. So there was a 70-year-old innovator who had actually patented it as well. And he was interested in licensing because there was no way he could commercialize it. So there was an entrepreneur we identified in Maharashtra who was very interested in it. And I was like very excited, that's my first deal, we'll do it. But, guess what? So that innovator, 70-year-old man, said, I want like $1 million for this technology upfront. Now, how do I convince him that, this is not worth $1 million and nobody will pay you $1 million upfront? Let him implement the technology and make money out of it till he pays you, right? Because it can't be like a one-time process. Now, but from an innovator's perspective, now that gentleman had a fear that once I give my technology, will I get anything later on? Because there is this whole thing of royalty on sales, or, you can get deferred payments. But again, typically, there have been a lot of cases where people take your technology, innovation, IP, they will commercialize, they'll say, okay, on every unit, I'll give you X amount, 5%, 10% of that. But typically what happens is, I'll say, I'll give you 10%, I'm supposed to make, let's say, 100,000 pieces. I'll say, hey, the market is bad, I just landed up selling 10,000 pieces. So please take 10% for the 10,000 and not for the 100,000. So that those are basic blocks and real issues which actually get encountered, and I have personally come across that. So I wanted to basically kickstart this by sharing this, and now I'd like to invite the first panelist, Mr. Padmanabhan, to come and make his presentation. So he's got a PowerPoint for us, and he's going to share his thoughts and what he faces in his institution. And I please request you to take a lot of examples and what you personally encountered, because that's what the audience will really associate with. Thank you.
We have launched Mars mission at 1/10 the cost of anybody else have done. Right? It's just a statement which we all can keep in mind as we go down the line. Now, coming to where I come from, it's a research lab about 15 years old, with about 170 people, with the idea of developing materials and processes right up to the stage of transferring it to industry. We work in several areas which are shown there. from nanomaterials to application of lasers in manufacturing, several of them. Now, our approach has been, we have to be industry-centric, right from the conceptualization of the project. We have to be collaborative, both at national and international level, and we are not interested in reinventing the wheel. These are the premises with which we work, and what we achieved is about 25 technology transfers, field tested and proven them in several sectors, and also collaborated with R&D laboratories in more than 15 countries. I'll go through 3 typical case studies of technology transfer, which we have effected, with a little background on what it started with and what it ended with. This is a technology on coatings, where there is a well-established thermal spray technology in the market. But this coating technology was better, but it had only niche applications. The institutes in India were not aware of the technology fully, and industry also had little experience. This is where we started. But the technological advantage is what we wanted to take it to the industry. How did we do it? We first prepared a demo unit. We identified applications and optimized them, the coating technology for that. Did several job works, started fabricating the equipment itself in India, did a business development workshop, got an entrepreneur to sign with us, and did the hand-holding with him to develop many more applications, and then set up a production facility. Now, this particular technology serves so many sectors. A 5 million company is now 50 crore company, located in Hyderabad. And this is a typical coating technology transfer that we have effected. And this has become a role model for several coating technologies that we are working on. I'll go to the next one. Nano silver for textiles. We all hear about nano silver as an antibacterial material used in several household appliances because silver kills bacteria. Now, we have developed this technology or the process to synthesize the silver. And we found a company which has expertise in applying certain materials on textiles. They had the expertise. But there were several upscaling challenges. Like, you really have to design the specification of the material with cells. And you should have also the scalability of the process to something like 6,000 kgs. What did we do? Took the lab scale technology, proved the material efficacy, identified the saleable products, did the market sensitization with the help of the partner. Then, since the partner has substantially contributed in the whole activity, we filed joint patents together and clearly identified what customer likes. Then went to the idea of scaling up the process, get the regulatory clearances, and set the testing protocols. See, the first part is just only 5% of the whole chain. And starting from saleable products identification to here, it is the partner who has substantially contributed before the actual technology transfer taken place. Now what you have here is a product called N9 being sold all over the world, and Walmart sells these shirts coated with nano silver that we have developed. The third technology. Okay, I'll talk the second technology. Now, those are two cases. Now, just to summarize, what research labs can possess? We have R&D capability at laboratory scale, and we are capable of producing some small quantities and also prototypes. Let us accept this fact as an R&D person, but at the same time, what market needs is much more than what it is. Products and service which are valuable, usable, saleable. This is the gap in the thought process between an R&D lab and a market or a taker of the technology. Now, What happened in this case is a nano composite coating on glasses. It had the USP of being eco-friendly, different shades of colors possible. The quality of coatings is better than what is available in the market, but then we don't know where to sell it. And there are 3 or 4 big companies like Saint-Gobain and others who control the total business in the glass business. But they are not interested if any of this can replace any of their present production line. The whole investments they made could go useless if they have to change it. Then another is, from the technology point of view, it is delicate. So what we did, we demonstrated technology to multiple entrepreneurs. They went fanned out. What we thought, we will develop beautiful colored coatings for high-level architectural applications and all those things. But our thinking was not correct. When we did a business development meet and called everybody, then some companies showed interest. And what you see is mundane products. Some of those Feng Shui articles getting colored, simple Ganeshas, and articles which you have on in your showcase. But there's a tremendous market for this, which we could not foresee, but the businessman could see. He did the market sensitization. He sat with us with every new application that he comes, every day in the morning, he comes with one. So we signed something called an option agreement with him, that you keep on bringing, we keep on developing. The day you feel the market is sizable, you take the technology. This is what we experimented here. And just last week, the technology transfer happened. Now, to summarize these 3, first one, a niche technology. Second one, based on a new material. Third one, based on a coating, which is meant for very common applications. It's an equipment-based, product-based, and a platform technology. So in each of these 3 varieties, the approach, one approach is common, that is collaboration. The other approach is in terms of the engagement models, where in one case it is direct technology transfer, in another case joint application demonstration, in the third case it is option spread over a longer period. So you need to adapt models depending on what technology you have and what is its market size and how the market responds to it. Now, having said this, what are the key challenges to bridge the gap between the innovators and the users and industries? What is needed to bridge this gap? Collaborations between stakeholders, so that to bring in a coherence in the thought process. A scientist thinks, I got excellent antibacterial quality on my material. What do I do with it? But the same industry person will ask, the moment he asks, what is so great about it, the industry or entrepreneur will ask. The scientist immediately feels bad. I have done such a big thing, such a thing. Nowhere in any literature, this kind of the bacteria killing activity has been reported. For him, that gives him a high. But for an entrepreneur, it is no high. So, basically both of them have to be brought to think coherently in terms of making the innovation usable. Then, he was mentioning about the mistrust. He feels if I reveal something, it will be kind of stolen and used for all kinds of purposes. But at the same time, the entrepreneur feels, is this fellow really capable of delivering what I'm looking for? Right? These kind of things, if both of us sit together and work up an excellent IP protection system, it can substantially contribute to the trust among the stakeholders. Similarly, we found capital is quite important to bridge this gap because definitely risk is involved when you talk of technology areas. So, to address the first issue of bringing coherence and to make scientists as well as the entrepreneurs think similar as far as development of a technology is concerned, we developed internally a concept called intellectual property development indices. Starting from development of the basic concept to identifying applications, technical feasibility establishment, coupon level testing, repeatability testing. There are the IP chain milestones, which again divided into multiple steps. And in each step, what kind of engagement model with the stakeholder is applicable. For example, you can start a collaboration right from the conceptual stage. You can start a collaboration after lab demonstration has taken place. So, which are the relevant models when you are in the IP chain at exploratory studies and laboratory demonstration? You can have collaborative or sponsored research. Now, if I go to the prototype testing level, field testing, I need a partner. That's where, again, collaboration is required. Then checking repeatability, again, collaboration is required. Reassessing feasibility, same thing. Then, if I am already in my lab, reach the stage of technology transfer, initiation stage, even then, I don't know where to sell. I need a collaboration. So, we sign something called option agreements and technology transfer agreements. So, depending on where it is. Now, today, when I give this table to my scientists, they're able to immediately place themselves where they are. 1, step 7, step 8, where it is. And my business development group, he is able to clearly explain to the receiver of the technology or industry that this is where we stand, these are the implications of this. If you are interested, we'll come join together. If not, maybe some other partner. So, this was an effort which we have made. Scientists also do not feel uncomfortable when we quantify and give them certain definitions, right? Simply saying that your technology is not complete, they don't feel too good. If I say them, you are at 6, they immediately place themselves and don't take offense to it. Similarly, the receiver of the technology also understands what I am talking. I am at 6, so whether I am interested or not. By developing these indices and applying it, we have had certain reasonably good experience, and we also been able to engage ourselves with the prospective receivers of technology in a much more, articulated manner. And some of the successes I have already showed. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Padmanabhan, for your insights. Very interesting, the kind of stuff you're doing. So one of the things I gathered is that you need to give a framework. You need to give certain metrics to any kind of development that you're talking, because research otherwise can be a black hole. I'm doing research now, I could be doing research 5 years down the line. But what does it mean from an outsider perspective, right? What stage I am in. So if you can actually put a framework, you can put a metrics, and actually, that's exactly what you've done, and we will take this up during our discussion later, is how do you really able to handle both the key stakeholder. One is your scientist and other is the entrepreneur outside. And that's when, you can start bridging the gap. Otherwise, we can be talking Greek and Latin, which nobody can understand. So moving on, I would like to invite Radha Rangarajan, the CEO of Vitas Pharma, to share her thoughts in terms of public-private partnership as an entrepreneur working in a research environment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And many thanks to the organizers of TIE ISP Connect, Bipin, Safir, for inviting me to be here, and to Rajiv for chairing this panel. So I'm going to give you a different perspective from Dr. Padmanabhan. I come from the dark side, if you will, which is industry. So Vitas Pharma is a biotech company. We are focused on what is called drug discovery and development. So basically, if you've taken a pill today, which I guarantee at least 50% of you have, or if you know anybody else who has, that pill has come after considerable years of research and development. And what it means is that somebody in a lab 15 years ago started the process, identified that the molecule had certain properties, then it was taken through successive stages of development, first testing in the test tube on cells, then in the animal models, then in humans, in the process establishing both the safety and the efficacy of the molecule. So before you actually get to take that drug on a daily basis or as needed, something like a few thousand people have taken it, and the data from all of those clinical trials are available to you to see how safe and efficacious it is. So that's the space that Vitas Pharma operates in. We are a discovery and development company, meaning that we are in the business of identifying new drugs. And the drugs that we're trying to develop are for infectious diseases. So if you look around you, you will see reports of multi-drug resistance. What is multi-drug resistance very quickly is that there are bacteria now that are no longer responding to antibiotics that we used to commonly use even up to 5 years ago. Penicillins, you might be familiar with fluoroquinolones like ciprofloxacin, things like that. So these are all antibiotics that are commonly used for bacterial infections. The bacteria have evolved. They are now resistant. Very often people get infections that cannot be treated with 1, 2, 3 classes of antibiotics. These are called multi-drug resistant infections. And we're reaching a point where the number of infections that are resistant to 5 or 6 classes of antibiotics is reaching crisis proportions. So in 2010, the country was actually very much in the press because of the identification of what is called NDM1 superbugs. And these are called superbugs because they're resistant to last-line antibiotics. That means we have nothing left. And mortality rates from these infections are as high as 50%. And this is CDC statistics, WHO statistics. So there is a very growing, there is a very large and emerging need for new antibiotics, and that's the space that we are filling with the next generation of antibiotics that are coming from our lab. So what do? We have an R&D setup, which is incubated inside the University of Hyderabad. Our starting points for the research are often published scientific literature, findings, prototype compounds, scaffolds, etc., that people have written about. We take a prototype idea and then go through the entire validation process to arrive at a preclinical candidate, which then goes into toxicology studies and then clinical development. So if we are to run a project entirely from within our company, this is how it works. But we are we're very strongly aligned with the public-private model. And this comes from the realization that drug discovery and development is extremely expensive, and a small company like us cannot go all the way. So we work in a public-private partnership that's reflected in our incubation inside the University of Hyderabad. We receive grants from BIRAC. So in our 4 years, we have 2 grants from BIRAC, and now we have 1 grant approved from the Wellcome Trust, BIRAC. And we have filed 2 patents. 2 international patents, one about a month away from being granted. So these come from the R&D that we do in our laboratory, and this is very much in a public-private mode. What we always look for is collaborations with academia, because we fully realize that in order to keep a steady pipeline of products, that is, products that can be moved through preclinical development into clinical development, what we need is to tie up with academics who are exploring interesting and novel mechanisms by which to target bacteria. And so we collaborate with various people, and our collaborations so far have been with ICER Pune, NIMS Hyderabad, and so on. So these, and then also we collaborate with industry, other industry partners, because working out of the incubation center, we can set up certain things in-house, but certain things we have to outsource. And we try to work with other partners who understand the value of what we are doing and try to be part of our R&D journey. So those are the types of collaborations that we are engaged in. Before I tell you about the challenges that that come from working in this area, let me just say that there is a very strong and large unmet need. Our products have potentially peak sales of 200 to 400 million, in some cases 600 to 800 million USD worldwide. So we fill an unmet need. We're bringing novel antibiotics. We will bring novel antibiotics to the market, and we do this in a PPP mode. So what are our challenges? Capital. We can't do this work without significant capital invested in the work, in the projects. So currently we have grants from the government, and in December last year we closed our first round of seed funding through the Indian Angel Network. We have more rounds of funding to raise, And that reflects the fact that drug discovery and development is not done in one shot. There are various phases, like Dr. Padmanabhan mentioned, and at each phase, you de-risk the product a little bit more, allowing further investment to happen. So we raise money in tranches, and being able to access capital is a very, very important aspect of being able to deliver faster than industry average for us. The second is that our business model is to license out. So we have IP. We will never do manufacturing. We will never be able to show you bottles of pills, etc., from our shelves. No, our wealth is our IP, and so our model is to out-license the IP. And typically, we are looking to out-license to big pharma. So if you look at the Indian market, there are many pharmaceutical companies. However, they are focused on generics. So our markets are really outside the country. We're focused on MNCs in the pharmaceutical business, like Merck, GSK, BMS, and so on. But not having a local market to license to is also a significant issue. The third is regulatory. This is a sector where the regulatory aspect is a very large component of being able to take a product to market. Today, we cannot sell directly anything in the market unless we have regulatory approval to sell. And that comes only after you have done a very, very prescribed clinical development package in which you have established safety and efficacy. The reality is that the DCGI, which is entrusted with the job of approving applications to test in humans and for approval to market, moves at a very different pace than what small biotech is willing to or can absorb. So we have no other choice but to seek regulatory agencies outside the country. This again becomes a bottleneck. We are functioning in India, our IP is generated in India, but we have to step out of the country in order to actually complete the development work. So that's our third challenge. And I think the fourth one is not necessarily a challenge, but is a reflection of how markets are different globally. In India, any healthcare product has to keep in mind affordability. Whereas in Western markets, that is not a question. That is not an issue because insurance pays for these drugs. So again, the issue of affordability is closely tied to where you are raising capital from. If you are raising capital from public sources, I think it becomes easier to deliver at an affordable price. And so these things become very interrelated when the product actually comes to the market. So with these four pointers or broad topics that I've laid out, I'll pass the microphone on to our next speaker because I think we'll come back for the next round in which we talk about solutions. Yeah?
Thanks, Radha, for highlighting the challenges. And just to substantiate what she was saying, in my last trip to Hyderabad, I happened to visit Genome Valley, which is some 40-50 kilometers from main Hyderabad. So there I was talking to an entrepreneur who's also in drug discovery services. And I was just having a chat in terms of, how's business. So he was saying in India, it's extremely, it's becoming extremely difficult for us to compete with China, even in drug discovery services. And one of the reasons is this, just the logistics. For example, if you're operating in Genome Valley, the transportation cost of the raw material that comes in is far higher if we would buy it in Bombay, where it gets imported, for example. So, there could be a lot of these kind of challenges that, they face. And, but the good thing is, as I was hearing from Radha, is that government agencies like DBT, Department of Biotechnology, and BIRAC program that they run, they're extremely dynamic. So if you happen to go and visit them, you won't even feel you've visited a government office. So there are the positives also, but you obviously need a lot more support. So moving on, I would like to invite Dr. Satya Narayana, who's the Chief Scientist and Business Development Head at Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, to share his experience at the Institute. And by the way, Satya was just mentioning that they've been signing one MOU every few days, which means he's very busy, and which also talks about how dynamically they operate. So we'd like to hear from Satya. Thanks.
Well, it's great to be over here, the Indian School of Business. Well, though we call our division as in the Business Development Division, and I've been to this place, and thanks to the organizers, I've been here, and I'm really fascinated by, the look, the outlook, and also, the type of people that I'm finding over here, and then sharing the dais. Okay, because many of them, all of them, I know them personally too. Okay. Well, having said this, in fact, I must also thank Rajiv, because, when we are trying to put up this panel, he has given me a few points on which, we could all articulate. And I thought that, though, much I would like to talk about our institute, I thought let me deviate from this and then talk as if, I am an outsider. And then, because that's the way, if we bring out, some of the challenges that take place or that are, inherent while transferring research to lab, research to market. Okay, that's unless you take an impartial view, you will not be able to identify what are the real challenges. Okay, so I'll not try to take much time on the type of work that we do at Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, but then if there are some examples, I'll come back to and then talk about them. Okay. Now, if you look at the type of research that's being done. Maybe about 10-15 years back, you would only talk of research happening only at institutes, research institutes like the Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, or maybe the universities. You will not talk of any industry, a private industry, having an R&D unit of their own. Of course, multinationals do have, but then in India, it was something people would not imagine. Maybe about 15-20 years back, that you need to have an R&D cell. Okay. But then this is changing, and it's good that it has changed. And in fact, the Indian corporates are increasingly innovative. In fact, some of them are much more innovative compared to some of the publicly funded organizations. And we are seeing, more number of products that are coming out from them. I can say this, I can see the transition happening every now and then, because about 5-6 years back when I've joined Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, I was seeing, whenever we had meetings with the entrepreneurs, it was always the R&D heads, who used to come and then talk to us. But then now we have the CEOs themselves, because they are themselves understand the research. Many of them are doctorates. They come to us and then discuss. This is the recent trend. So this, I would say, proves that innovation is happening also in corporate worlds. Okay. But then it's good to have innovation in the corporate level, because the Prime Minister of India in 2013, he has said that the GDP spending on R&D should actually go up to something like 2%, like most of the advanced countries have. Okay? And this, and presently, the government has been spending about 0.8 to 1% of GDP, and the rest of it, should come from the corporate world. So that, together, if India can pull up about 2% of GDP, I think we have the infrastructure and the expertise, the scientists, entrepreneurs, to outcompete the best in the world. Okay. And to leverage, the type of diversity that we have, and people have been talking of the demographic dividend that India has. The corporate world does know that they cannot rely on their innovations alone, and they need to come to the research organizations. Okay. But of course, it sounds good that you go to a research organization and then do it, but then there should also be a cultural change that should happen in all the research organizations. Unless that happens, you will not find the corporate world coming and then joining hands with research organizations. But then, thankfully, in the last 10 years, I have seen a change happening in the research organization as well. I can see it happening in my own institute. Okay. We are more open to partnerships, collaborations. As Raja was talking to Rajiv, we have signed, in the last year, in the last financial year, we have signed maybe about more than 150 MOUs with different companies. So what it actually means is almost every second day we are entering into an MOU with an industry. And the industrial projects that we have is about 90 industries who have come to us and then taken our products. So that again would mean that almost every third working day we have a project coming from an industry. And this is also reflected in the earnings that we do. Earlier, we were predominantly, we are primarily dependent on the government to fund us, but then now this has taken a back seat, and then we have more number of industries coming forward and then funding us the research. Now, actually, if you look at, why is it that the industry would come to a research institute, okay? They would come to a research institute only if, some of the transactions that happen are very swift and flexible, okay? Unless this happens, you're always, keep yourself at a distance from a research institute, okay? And fortunately, the CSIR labs, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, have the autonomy to operate and evolve models of their own, business models of their own. Okay, and we try to bring in good number of business innovations into the way we do business with them. And there are several success stories which have come out. Some of them, of course, Dr. Padmanabhan has articulated for ARCI. Okay. But then I would also talk about some of other challenges and bottlenecks that act as impediments when you're trying to convert research into commercial products. Okay. Trust deficit is something which I've always been talking about. What is this trust deficit? Okay. Now, we as an R&D lab, we can have we can quote number of examples where we feel that we have been shortchanged, or we have been cheated by the industries. Like if you see the agrochemical industry in India, okay, 60% of whatever we produce or whatever is going to production comes from the technology of Indian Institute of Chemical Technology. Okay, now how many sitting here would know? In fact, I was not knowing about this when I was not a part of IICT. Okay, and also once you transfer the technologies, you are expected to get some royalties, but then that is not happening. What is the reason? The reason is the industry would come back, and then when there's no royalty coming, they would come back and then tell that sorry, we changed the process. If you want, you can come and check. So it's a totally different process from what you are given, so we don't have to pay you any royalty. Okay. Now, we don't have the wherewithal or the time and energy to spend, go there and then inspect and then really find out whether they are continuing with the same old process that we are given, or they have totally changed the process. Okay. So we don't have, we just don't do anything. And then once there's no action from our part, this gets others also take it as a precedence, and then they stop giving us royalty. So this is a deficit that we as a researcher would say. This is one example that I've given, but then I can give you several other examples. Okay. But then what is it, if I look at it from the industry point of view, what is it that they see? The delivery is one thing that is always questionable. Okay, and if you're not able to deliver, this being a government institute or publicly funded institute, it becomes a long drawn process for you to drag us to a suit, drag us to court. Okay, so the industry would prefer not to come to research institutes unless you are able to promise good deliverables. Okay. Now, how did we get over this particular problem? Okay. And in fact, when we talk to some of our scientists, they become, some of them, of course, not these days, but then they turn cynical and then say that why don't we give it to the industry? They just cheat us. Okay. So we now have a sort of mechanism by which to keep both the scientists and the industry happy, and in the process see that the research comes to the market. So what we have done is we have now done away with a royalty in terms of percentage of the product sales or the production, but then we say that you pay us one-time royalty, okay, which the industry is happy. Okay, but then when it comes to payments, say if I charge about 30 lakhs to the industry for the type of work that we are supposed to do, we tell them that please don't pay us upfront. Okay, you pay maybe something like about 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs, whichever is comfortable in the beginning. Okay, and then you give us the milestones. Okay, You tell us that, against this particular delivery, only then I release the next payment, okay? And we also include a penalty clause, okay? That is a part of it that we get from, say, the first installment, we keep it aside, we don't touch it, and then this we can forfeit or if we fail in our deliverable, okay? So this has actually, acted as a tremendous, confidence booster among the industry. And this, we have been very consistent with the type of business that we do. So it is the delivery, the payment is always linked to the deliverables which are monitored by the industry themselves. Okay. So with this, we are able to, as I said, about 150 companies have come to us, and then we have been doing MOUs with them. I think this is one of the driving force for them. And then what we also do is, in addition to the payment part of it, we come to them and then tell them, like say for example, we need to produce avobenzone. Okay. Now to produce avobenzone, there are several other products which the company has to make. Okay. So what we do is we go into do backward integration and then try to develop technologies for them, the 3-4 technologies or the 3-4 raw materials that goes into avobenzone. So this is another model that we have developed, and this has become very successful because mainly because the China angle. For most of the intermediate or drug manufacturer, pharma manufacturers, they depend on the Chinese to supply them the intermediates. But then now we give them a process also to make those intermediates and the other raw materials. Okay. So it's a backward integration that the model that we give them. And what we also do is when we are trying to scale up the research from bench scale to a pilot scale, we don't tell them that after 6 months we'll come with you with a document which says this is the pilot plant trial that we have done. We don't do that. Okay. What we do is, of course, the bench scale research we do. After that, when we are trying to do pilot scale research before taking it up to commercial scale, we invite the companies to come to our premises. Okay. And the number of companies which come to our premises, they spend about 3-4 months, participate along with us, spend in the 3 shifts that we have for the pilot plant trials, get a hands-on feel of what we are doing, and then once that is done, it becomes very easy for them to commercialize the technologies that we have. That we generate. Okay. Another classic example of what we have done, the type of model that we have done is enzymatic degumming of rice bran oil. I think many of you do not know that 60% again of whatever is being consumed in India, the rice bran oil, which is a very heart-friendly oil, edible oil, comes from the technology which IICT has developed. Okay. So here what we have done is looking at the importance of this and the benefits that it will have in the health for the health of the consumers. We have taken help of the government and then convinced them to give subsidy to all the industries who will be taking it up. Okay. So government is looking at the process. They have decided to give 45 lakhs subsidy to the industries which will take up this particular technology, and about 30 such industries were benefited by this. And it's, when we talk of technology transfer, we just don't mean handing over a document. We do more than that. What we call it is hand holding. Okay, we are there involved at every stage. We go to the premises, see that it is properly set up. Only then we say that the technology has been successfully transferred. Okay, yeah. I'll just wind up by saying that what needs to be done to accelerate the process is to bridge the trust deficit. How we do it, I can give you examples later. Okay, and then there's more number of such interaction meets between industry and the research institutes, and maybe the government can form a consortium of research industries, research institutes, and industry, and for this support from state and central government is required. Thank you.
You mentioned about doing a lot of MOUs, and what I would like to understand is what's the impact it's created in the market. How has it benefited society? If you can just share an example of that.
Well, if you talk of, the benefits directly to the society, I would not be able to tell, because, all these things have come to the industries, and that's what I said, like agrochemicals is one example that I gave you. Though the benefit has come to the society at large, because you have good number of environmental friendly pesticides to counter the pests that you have in agriculture. But then for us, we are only monitoring how good were we at transferring it to a particular industry. Okay, but then yes, maybe we need to look back and then see what impact it had on the society, and if some such analysis is done, then we can always go back and then showcase that this is the amount of benefit that has come out to the institute. But then because of the technology that we developed, that's where you get more visibility. But then yes, we do lack models in trying to find out what is the impact that our technology has given to the society.
So actually, yeah, that's a suggestion for all research institutes, because they do such great work. But the fact of the matter is, as entrepreneurs or professionals, as outsiders, you really don't understand and relate to what they've been doing. So you need to really be able to do outreach programs and do impact studies, because it becomes very important. You should allocate certain budgets and resources to just analyze and see what's happening on the ground, what is the kind of impact it's created, because it helps you showcase your work and helps you attract the right kind of people. That becomes important. Which kind of industry would like to associate with you? Just because you're in chemical industry does not mean only chemical companies should be talking to you. Like the other day, I was with a scientist who's developed a chemical to drive away mosquitoes. Now that will have a great market for FMCG companies, right? So chemical has fantastic applications. So, that also helps you attract the right set of partners. And, I think...
the major exporters from India.
Absolutely. Yeah, chemical is really one of the important sectors. So coming to, Radha, I would like to understand from a public partnership perspective, you mentioned that, you've been working with them. So what have been the key, takeaways for you? If any of them has to engage with any, with government organization, because all of us are skeptical generally to engage with any government organization.
So, Rajiv, the basis for a public-private partnership is trust. And coming back to what Dr. Satyanarayana said, what we often find is that it is difficult to convince public institutions that as industry partners, A, we will be fair, and B, we will be willing to share the revenues when they show up on our books. Yeah. So the difficulties have been with putting reasonable MOUs in place that are fair to us and fair to the public institution. And in some cases, it has even been difficult to convince public institutions that it is okay for them to take milestones and royalties. So, in other words, their charters are written in such a way that they are not actually allowed to be seen as making a profit. And so if their R&D is commercialized through a public-private partnership and that product goes to the market, and this in particular is about a diagnostic kit that we're working on, the kit goes to the market and makes money, and we said, since we are splitting the work, you take 50% and we take 50% of the revenues of the net sales, and the response was that we're not allowed.
That's a good example.
Right. If you're not allowed, then what kind of an MOU can we put in place? And does that mean, therefore, that we walk away? So in many instances, I have had to work with institutions for almost a full year or 15 months to try and get a reasonable MOU in place. So these are this is one of the big challenges, and the other big challenge is I think that biotech industry with its capabilities in research is a relatively new phenomenon. So many public institutions see themselves as being able to do research, but don't see companies as being able to contribute to the process. So it becomes very much of a one-way street. Here you take what we have, it's already a finished product, but we have to tell them that no, there's a lot more validation work to do. So one is a perception problem, and the other is actually an organizational issue.
So coming to Mr. Padmanabhan, you talked about this interesting concept of option, agreements, right? So it's like work in progress kind of stuff. So can you just elaborate in terms of how you thought through this and how effective it has been?
There are certain technologies which are having applications in variety of sectors. Like there is a particular, as one of the examples that I mentioned, it is colored coating on glass is the technology. But then there are different types of applications to it, simple artifacts that I have shown, to adding a little more functionality to it to filter out UV before entering, which can be used for glasses, for automotive or something like that, or for buildings, and add little more functionality to make it easy to clean. So these are something called platform technologies, having multiple applications. But at the same time, one application alone may not be sufficient for the entrepreneur to survive with the market size that he has got. So, and it started with an experience like they started exploring coating simple plain glass. But then he came up with a constraint that unless you can coat a 8 feet by 4 feet glass, I will not be able to take this technology.
Okay.
Right? Then he started diversifying and exploring several other things. Now, if we say that you asked for only a technology on simple plain glass coating, and you are now coming with every morning a new requirement, we don't have time to do all this. Or it is not so interesting innovatively for somebody who is looking for real kick from science that happens. But then we have to overcome that thing that doing repeatedly the same thing on something else is not interesting. But definitely our scientists could be convinced that it is interesting to try it out on a different article, different shape. Even the geometry change will have problems in how you spray coat it and all those things. Keeping that in mind, we said that we will have an option agreement with the entrepreneur for 1 year. He pays a kind of a commitment fee of 1 lakh of rupees or 2 lakhs of rupees. And then every morning that he comes up with a new application, he has to pay 25,000 rupees
Fair enough.
as a commitment fee again.
Fair enough.
Our scientists will work on it, give him the required number of specimens, and the coating costs are charged in terms of so many rupees per square centimeter. So by the end of the day, whatever 1 lakh he has paid earlier is also accounted for the amount of coating he has already got done from us. And then this process helped in 6 months itself. He could identify a basket of applications where this technology could be used. And he came back saying that I am ready for the transfer.
Absolutely.
So this option agreement concept we started about 2 years ago. Already 2 technologies are seeing success because of this.
Let's give a big hand to